Hello. Could I have everybody please take a seat? People at the back. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. How has it been going so far? Good? Well, we're halfway there. We have an even more exciting second half. So I hope you got something good to eat and also some coffee if you need it. Yeah? So let's try to get the brain warmed up. We have a very, very exciting speaker up ahead. And just to get the mood going, I'm going to go through round 2 of our trivia quiz. So ready for that? Yeah? OK, cool. And this is a tough one, by the way. So, yeah, the good prices, believe it or not. OK, here's the first question. What is a Banky moon? B-A-N-K-Y, moon, M-O-O-N. And your options are A, a company that aims to use blockchain-based solutions in developing countries to send money directly to electricity smart meters for poor schools to provide them with electricity. B, a company that allows the transfer of medical records from health institutions to the person directly. C, a philanthropic company started by our ex-UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. D, a company that provides mobile payment services in Zanzibar. Who said A? OK, good job. That's the right answer. OK, this is also a pretty cool one. China's insurtech industry has become known for offbeat insurance products. Which of the following have Chinese insurers offered? A, overtime work insurance. B, mid-autumn moon insurance. C, traffic jam insurance. We need that. D, all of the above. OK, I'm going to give the answer. It's actually B. So the moon insurance product offers compensation if rain cloud blocks one view of a moon during China's Mid-Autumn Festival, when a glimpse of the moon is considered a good luck. Well, believe it or not, right? By the way, they also have insurance to cover package returns, parking tickets. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, this should be a simpler one. So let's try this. The creation of 1 Bitcoin consumes energy equivalent to A, 10 windmills, B, 2 years of electricity consumption for the average US household, C, Slovenia's energy consumption, or D, the 3 Gorges hydroelectric dam. B is correct. So whoever answered the previous one and this one, just meet me and I have a gift card for you guys. Great, good. I hope you got the energy going. So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Geoff Schmidt. Geoff is the CEO of Apollo GraphQL. It's a disruptive query language, and it's poised to change how a lot of software is written and used. The platform is in production by top startups and enterprises, including Airbnb, GitHub, the New York Times, OpenTable, CNBC, Ticketmaster, et cetera, to name a few. Based in San Francisco, Apollo is backed by top investors, including Andreessen Horowitz, Matrix Partners, Trinity Ventures, and Y Combinator. Geoff is also the CEO of the Meteor Group, and the Meteor Group is also funded by the same set of folks. Geoff also runs, in his spare time, which is very little, Geoff runs Monument, which is a live-work art space. It's a place where people in tech and art can express their creativity. And very interestingly, Geoff has also attended 13 Burning Mans. I still have to attend my first. So Geoff's going to talk about GraphQL. Over to you, Geoff. Thank you.
I've got the board, I've got the brain. Let's make lots of money.
That's Pet Shop Boys, if people recognize. Thanks, Geoff, for coming all the way from San Francisco.
Awesome, and thank you so much for the intro.
So there's some big digital native names you named there, and you're founder of a startup, and you're helping some big names like Airbnb, some media companies like CNBC. So what's going on? What are you doing for them?
And considering where we are today, I should probably add PayPal, Stripe to that list of other people that are adopting this technology. But let me take a step back. Something I've been really interested in for a long time is why it's so hard to build apps and why it's so hard to build digital experiences. One of the ways that I think about the mission of Apollo is to make sure that there's a high-quality digital app for everything. But when we look around us, when we think about what it takes to bring these apps to market, we find that it's really difficult. And I've been really interested in the question of why that is, like why it's so hard to do digital. And an analogy I might use is, if, let's say you had 5 tons of freight on the West Coast, and you wanted to get it to the East Coast, and you talked to your head of logistics, and they said, well, we just can't do that. We can't get it from the West Coast to the East Coast. It's going to be a research problem. We're going to have to build a whole team. We don't know how long it's going to take. You'd say that's just completely unacceptable. How can I run a business if those basics like freight logistics aren't things that are really nailed down and understood, that I can just turn on and off whenever I need it? But right now, app development, our ability to take all these services we've got in the cloud and bring them to our end users, whether they're partners or actual individual consumer users, that's something that's just as important. Every time we want to reach out to any of our customers or partners, we most likely have like some element of that we want to do digitally. That's still really hard. It's not just like flipping a light switch the way so many other things that we depend on are. So that's one of our starting points, just asking, why is it so complicated and how can we make it easier? And as we've researched this over the years, first with Meteor and then with Apollo, and Meteor, our previous project, that was one of the top 10 most popular open source projects on the internet. It was a framework for building applications. One of the things we learned from Meteor in building that and working with many companies on their app development is that there's a big problem with APIs right now. And the problem basically is we're at a point where APIs are becoming much more important and also much more complicated, but the technology that we use to build our APIs is still stuck back in the digital Stone Age. So we're still using technologies like REST and SOAP that are 20 years old. They date back to roughly the 90s, and they were designed for a very different environment and a very different problem domain. And the basic problem, and feel free to jump in here if sometimes I monologue, and that's not one of my best properties. Maybe it's okay when I'm on stage. One of the basic problems with that previous generation of API technologies is that you might call them point-to-point. They're based on the idea of making a connection between you've got some data supplier or service supplier over here, and you've got some consumer over here. It might be your app, it might be a partner, it might be an internal system. It might be some like marketplace or coalition or aggregator or something like that. The problem is you have to build these point-to-point connections. So every use case, and a use case might be a screen in your app, or it might be a particular thing that one of your partners is going to do with the data. Each of those is what's called an endpoint in old API technology. You have to kind of pre-negotiate, pre-arrange every single one of those use cases. So what that means is, your developer's trying to build some new screen in your app. You say, hey, this is what I want. You give them the wireframe, and that can take weeks to just get that screen built. Well, a lot of that time is they're having to do an integration with all your backend services. They're having to go find all the different microservices or systems of record or partners or wherever that data actually lives, and they're having to build an integration. That screen in your app, it might rely on 100 pieces of data, and they have to write the code, working with all those teams to get those 100 pieces of data right to that screen. And you have to do that every single time you have a new use case for your API. So for first-party app development, that manifests itself as just like this very slow time to market and this like very low degree of agility whenever you're trying to ship new features. For partners or integrations, that manifests it as, hey, I made a big investment in my API. That's great, but now I keep on going to my partners and say I want to change. Your API isn't good enough. And it's like I thought I could make this one investment, but now I have to customize it for each partner. And that customization or that constant investment in integrations is just a fact of life for that previous generation of API technology.
Yeah, this all sounds great, Geoff. I think the big problem in financial services is agility. It looks like you're addressing that. And a lot of startups and fintechs actually are able to do things faster. So this is very applicable. The banks have deployed APIs and platforms in the last few years. So how does one go about looking at what GraphQL can do in banking? And if you think about the initiatives or the big things the banks are working on, there's obviously the neobank, the digital bank, enhancing existing customer experience, and there's blockchain, the new kid in the block. So how does this fit into any or all of these?
Sure. There's a new technology, GraphQL, that is rapidly being adopted by developers as one of the ways that you can kind of combat this like tightly coupled point-to-point nature of the previous generation of API technology. And what GraphQL essentially does is it lets you create a marketplace for data or services inside your company. So you can do this integration once, and then you can have all your different digital initiatives can draw on that data. You don't have to perform an integration each time. So to go through some banking and financial services use cases, so you mentioned neobanks. One of the basic challenges you have there is you have a lot of infrastructure that you've built, and you've got these assets in the forms of your business processes, your services, all the systems you've built. And the challenge you face is you have a new use case for all of these things, and you need to figure out how you can like rapidly ship a very high quality digital experience that sort of goes toe to toe with like what Facebook is shipping or what Airbnb is shipping or what Netflix is shipping. You want to have that level of consumer experience, but you want to have it on top of like many systems. You don't get to start from a blank sheet of paper the way some of those companies have done. And so that's a use case that's right in the sweet spot of GraphQL. So you can go into that team that's building your apps, building the digital experience there, and you can basically just drop this in. And what it's going to let them do is it's going to let them take all of your systems and services and just come to market faster, first of all, so you'll be able to get the app out there faster into the hands of users faster. And second, you're going to have a lot more agility in terms of your ability to add features to the app. So it's not like you shipped it, if you want to change anything, it's now 6 months before you can make a change. You can have a much tighter loop where you're getting feedback from how people are using it, whether that's from your product managers or your user surveys or even just like analytics and data to show which people are using which screens. And you could rapidly turn that around back into, oh, hey, I want to change this screen, I want to add this functionality. You can much more rapidly respond to the functionality that other people are shipping, what you're learning from your users to really track what users want and ultimately win that battle for the top ranking in the App Store.
Sounds great. And I do want to engage the audience. If you have questions, do raise your hand, and I think we'll get you in the discussion. She talked about the neobanks. Open banking is a big trend as well, which is mainly APIs and kind of third parties building to those APIs. Does this kind of impact that trend as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one way to think about this is the problems you have when you're building apps internally, where you want to deliver a high-quality digital experience in a very agile way, you have those problems even more so with respect to APIs whenever you're building a platform, because the essence of how this device talks to the cloud for an app, that's an API, but in that situation, at least the person who's building this app works for you. When you are engaging in any kind of platform project or open banking project or API project with partners, you have an even more challenging situation, which is you can't necessarily anticipate what the use cases of your API is going to be ahead of time. And those people don't even sit inside your building. They're not even part of the same management structure. So what you want to do is you want to provide them with a very powerful set of tools so they can pull whatever data that they need. At the same time, you want a powerful set of controls so they have to declare their intentions, and you can approve and put a governance process around what that usage of your data is going to be. But you want to do that all in a really agile and flexible way without having to build a lot of customizations in code. So that's another really important use case for GraphQL. And we're starting to see this with companies like GitHub, which is kind of the hub where all the software development happens these days, or with Shopify, are examples of customers, of users that are moving their public APIs to GraphQL. And I'll give you an example of how this is played out in some of these adjacent spaces. If you think about, for example, Shopify, they're in a situation where it's very important to them. They want to be like the Salesforce of e-commerce. They want to be the platform that everyone builds on top of, that everyone has to use, because they're the center of this web of integrations, and that web of integrations and partnerships makes them kind of the necessary choice for anyone doing e-commerce. That's their ambition. Well, to do that, they have to have a good API. They have to be able to have this whole ecosystem of other services and applications that build on top of them. Well, that means if someone's going to integrate into the Shopify checkout flow, for example, that had better be a really very fast, low latency integration, because every additional millisecond that they're slowed down when that partner app plugs into the Shopify checkout flow is going to affect their conversions. And they could see that the old APIs they built were too inflexible. The partners weren't able to build high quality enough apps, and they weren't able to work with enough partners. So by switching to GraphQL, they can offer a much more flexible set of capabilities to these partners while still keeping control over how the partners are using those capabilities. And so that's one reason, because it lets you enable your partners and have more partner relationships faster, with fewer customizations, and with a better experience for your mutual customer or your mutual user. That's one of the reasons why this technology is important for platformization and open banking use cases. The other reason is, if you run the clock forward, this is rapidly growing as a standard way to do APIs. So, Apollo downloads have grown from, I think, 10,000 downloads a week at the beginning of last year to, I think we recently had our first 400,000 download week. So there's very rapid growth of this as just an API technology. So if you think about what you're going to invest in when you're building APIs, do you want to invest in the format of APIs or the API platform that's 20 years old, or do you want to invest in the platform that's rapidly growing that all the digital native companies are investing in? You're going to deliver a better digital experience that's more a better developer experience that's more future-proof if you invest in the technology, which thankfully is now mature, for what APIs are going to look like for the next 20 years.
Fair enough. And you talked about downloads and rise of downloads. So talk a little bit about what folks are downloading, meaning what does Apollo provide in the GraphQL environment, and who's the target audience? It looks like it's developers and architects. Talk about that.
Sure. So we are the GraphQL company. So we build we're first and foremost an open source company. So we build open source, open infrastructure, open tools. Your developers can just go online, download it, use it. You never have to talk to us if the stuff that's out there, if you can integrate yourself and it does what you need. But what we found by working with many of the companies that we've listed here today is it's really helpful to have a partner as you implement this technology, and it's also really helpful to have the right management tools and controls and governance processes and developer tools around that. So what we can do is, if you're thinking this might be something that's good for you, we have a process where we can come in, we can work with your app dev team, we can work with your API team and say, is this applicable to you? The reality is, in a lot of cases, they're probably already looking at it or using it just because of the rate at which it's grown amongst developers. We can help you make sure that's on the right track. We can help you understand your business objectives. And in addition to the sort of the ones and zeros the developers are putting in there, we can bring in the right controls and workflows and governance tools so that you can really understand and get the most value out of the investment. That's one part of it. The other part is what we see is, for example, probably shouldn't name the name, but a large electronics payments company, they found that they had 30 different teams inside their company that were independently implementing GraphQL. And you don't want 30 data marketplaces, you want one data marketplace. So it's important that, the nature of this thing is developers really like using it, so once it gets inside your company, it tends to spread. And that's a good thing, but you want to have that managed. So we can bring that, we can bring a federated set of tools, so you can take all those 30 teams or however many teams you have and make sure that that really just ends up being one marketplace for all your data, one view of all your data that your CIO can have some central visibility into.
That's great. And talking about data marketplaces reminds me a lot of ontologies that the artificial intelligence guys talk about. So is there a relationship between what GraphQL and the data marketplace and what the AI talks about in ontologies?
Absolutely. So What GraphQL basically is, it's an ontology-based API. That's one way of looking at it. So and that's what the graph in GraphQL refers to. It refers to the idea that we're going to understand all the entities, like, I've got a customer, which is connected to an account, which is maybe connected to a branch, which is maybe connected to a device, whatever. You've got these objects that you've modeled, and you understand the connections between these objects. So whereas, the previous generation of APIs, I'm going to get a little technical for a second, REST, so I would call those procedural APIs. They're based on something called a remote procedure call. Basic idea is, hey, go run this process for me. That's the old thinking about APIs. And the new thinking about APIs embodied by GraphQL is ontology-based, where I've got a graph, I've got a schema, is the word we use in GraphQL, of all these different objects, all these different business objects, and then I should be able to, pick and choose from this set of business objects whatever data I need. So the problem that people have often had with ontologies in the past is you end up making a big investment and you're not really sure if the ontology is going to be right, and you discover that it's like kind of brittle. There's a lot of value there, which is why we still make those investments. But the core idea in GraphQL is that we're going to make an ontology that is a really flexible ontology with really good management tools that comes at it from the point of view of an application developer. So we use the fact that you're already building these applications, and we use the fact that your product developers have a really good idea of what they want to put on the screen. We essentially end up taking all of that knowledge that exists as you're actually building the apps and using that to drive a very rapid, very iterative, very lightweight process for figuring out what the right ontology is to fit on top of your services. So you don't have to think about it as an ontology investment if you don't want to. You can just say, oh, that's something your developers are doing to make apps faster. But a nice byproduct is you end up ending up with a pretty strong ontology. And that may seem like a tall claim, but I can back that up with the case studies that a bunch of the companies we mentioned about how by coming in this way, they could very quickly get to the point that they had a good ontology for their data. So if you think about how this connects with AI or with data science more broadly, there's two advantages to this. First of all, you can leverage all the work that your front-end developers are doing to build your applications. You can basically, no more screen scraping, no more building custom ways to service this data. You can use those very same APIs that you had to build for your front-end developers to get data into your data science or machine learning pipeline. So that's one really cool thing. And that's sort of the pattern of GraphQL. Don't make over and over and over again the same integration investments. Make one integration investment that's sitting inside your loop for how you're building these great digital experiences, then use that integration both for more digital experiences, for partners, and also for internal data science applications. And the other side, so you can use it as a way to get data into your machine learning and data science pipeline, but you can also use it on the other side. It's a great way, okay, I've done some great machine learning, and I have some insights. Like I know products you should try, you may know, transactions you should take a look at, recommendations for products you should consider. How do we then service that back to the user? We want the output of that pipeline to be in the ontology too, so we can very rapidly draw on that in every single channel where we interact with users, whether it's our CSRs or whether it's our native mobile apps or whether it's our branches. Or whether it's Apple Watch or your voice assistant or like whatever new channels in the future. Once you've got those insights, you want a good way to push those out to the customer.
Yeah, sounds fabulous and looks like a very cool development and might change how compute and application development happens. I want to get, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to get folks in the audience. Looks like there are a couple of hands. Can you be loud and ask your question? Yeah.
Sure. So the question is it client-side or server-side? And the answer is it's both. So this sits at the layer for how do you connect the cloud to the devices. So there's technically speaking, there's a library called Apollo Client, which is a GraphQL client. There's a piece called Apollo Gateway, which is the thing that connects to all of your different backend services. And then there's some management tools and services around it. So we straddle the client and the server and handle all the stuff in between, so that instead of having to write the code to get the data from the services to the clients, you just say, Apollo, go make it happen, and we have a declarative way of solving that problem for you in a way that you can manage and control.
Someone there? Can you speak up, Rajesh?
Yeah.
Just repeat the question.
So on the banking side, if there is a core system, core has their own APIs. On top of that, the banks are building the whole API layer of the enterprise person. And then they are also putting the MuleSoft and the FTG on top of it to manage those APIs. So where will this GraphQL sit in this three layers?
So it would sit we would look at how you're looking at MuleSoft or Apogee, and we'd probably sit alongside that or right above it or right below it. So those tools can be good for managing endpoint-based APIs and managing things like client identity. You probably have some investments there that help you understand the entitlements, like who should be able to do what to the API. Apollo probably sits, in most cases, probably directly behind that, and so it handles the, I guess another way of putting it is, you've got your API gateway layer, and then you've got your core services layer, and in between you've got this layer where you're probably writing a lot of custom bespoke code over and over and over again, all these endpoints for every single use case. We provide an incremental way to sit in that layer and reduce the amount of code you have to write there. So it maps the incoming API traffic to the core services. And the cool thing is, you can do it on top of whatever existing APIs you have. The typical adoption path is an incremental one where you say, hey, I have this investment in REST APIs. Great, I'll put this in front of it. I have this investment in an API gateway. I can work with that. And now what it gives you is kind of retrofits a lot of flexibility so you don't have to write endpoint after endpoint after endpoint. Absolutely.
No conversation in fintech and financial services full without talking about the new kid in the block, the blockchain. So in a foreseeable future, if there are more blockchain distributed ledgers on the network, on the internet, permissioned, non-permissioned, do you see GraphQL accessing those, presenting them to app developers or apps for that matter?
Yeah, I think the blockchain is an example of a larger trend, which is the cloud is getting more and more complicated. And you have this problem that you need a layer to connect the devices to the cloud where the devices, all your applications, need to not know about all the complexity that's happening in the cloud. You need to be able to start with your centralized system of record and introduce technology like blockchain without having to throw away and rewrite all of your applications. Because probably a lot of the ways that you reach all your users and partners are going to be similar, even as you add more complex, whether they're microservices or whether they're blockchain or the many innovations that are happening in the cloud, or even whether for that matter, there's distributed edge execution, there's serverless, there's an increasing complexity around how we do data residency and hybrid cloud. So what GraphQL lets you do is it lets you prepare for all of those changes. So even if you have a single monolithic system today and you see that there's going to be more complexity later, whether it's blockchain or any of those other technologies, it puts you in a really good place where you can incrementally roll that out without having to totally reinvent the way you talk to clients. And yeah, so I think it positions you well for blockchain, and you're probably going to need to make some sort of API layer investment to sort of seamlessly stitch together what's happening on the blockchain with your existing centralized services. And this is one way to do that.
Okay. You have, I believe, event coming up. You want to talk about that for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be at this event. We have an event of our own happening Wednesday and Thursday of next week in San Francisco. Many hundreds of developers from all over the world are flying in to come to the 3rd annual GraphQL Summit. So it'll be 2 full days, 2 tracks, 2 days of many of the world's top adopters and experts in GraphQL. So if this is a technology that's interesting to you, a good thing to do is to send your architect, send your tech lead, and they'll have a chance to meet the people that have implemented this at companies like PayPal and Stripe and Airbnb, Netflix, et cetera, and kind of hear from some people that have already done it, what the pros and cons might be, and what a realistic roadmap for it might be.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you, Geoff. I know there's some family issues. You have to fly out later today. Thanks for making time to cross the pond and come over to see us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paddy. It's a pleasure. All right.
Leave it.